Daniel Harper was the kind of man people admired from afar. At just 32, he had achieved what most could only dream of. A tech prodigy turned CEO, he had built his company from the ground up and turned it into a billion-dollar empire. Media outlets praised his genius, magazines splashed his face across glossy covers, and investors practically begged to work with him. Behind the closed doors of his glass mansion, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, however, a different story, quietly, unfolded. Emma Harper, his wife of 5 years, was the woman who had stood by his side long before the world knew his name. She had believed in his vision when it was nothing more than scribbles in a notebook. Kind-hearted, soft-spoken, and endlessly supportive, Emma had been Daniel's grounding force through the chaos of early startup life. She had cooked late-night meals while he coded, managed bills when money was tight, and encouraged him to chase his dreams when everyone else called him crazy. From the outside, their life was picture perfect. The sprawling estate with marble floors, a sleek infinity pool, and luxury cars in the garage painted the image of a power couple living the dream. Red carpet events, charity galas, and exotic vacations filled their social calendar. Smiling photographs on social media told the world they were in love. But behind Emma's gentle smile and Daniel's confident demeanor, cracks had started to form. Success had changed Daniel. With every new milestone, he became more consumed with power, more obsessed with maintaining his image, and less connected to the woman who once meant everything to him. He buried himself in work, rarely home for dinners, and often distracted when conversations became short, affection turned into obligation, and Emma often felt like a shadow in her own home. Still, she held on to hope, until one morning. Sitting in their sunlit bathroom, Emma stared at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. Her hands trembled. A flood of emotions washed over her: joy, fear, hope. She imagined how Daniel would react. Perhaps this would bring them closer again. Maybe this was the miracle their love needed to rekindle. She smiled through her nerves, unaware that this tiny life growing inside her would change everything. Forever. Emma waited until dinner to tell him. She had rehearsed the words all afternoon, envisioning how he might respond. She lit candles, made his favorite meal, grilled salmon with lemon butter sauce, and wore the soft blue dress he once said made her eyes shine. Her heart fluttered with nervous hope. Daniel arrived late. As usual, his phone pressed to his ear, deep in conversation about stock options and venture capital. He barely noticed the candles, let alone the food. Emma smiled anyway, trying not to let her disappointment show. Once he hung up and sat down, she placed her hand over his. "I have something to tell you," she said, voice steady despite her racing pulse. "I'm pregnant." Daniel froze. His fork hovered midair. His eyes narrowed. "You're what? Pregnant?" she said again, softly. "We're going to have a baby." A long silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Then Daniel pushed his plate away. "This wasn't part of the plan," he said coldly. Emma blinked. "What plan?" He stood and began pacing. "We talked about waiting. Until the IPO. Until things settled. Until I could breathe. And now this. I didn't plan this, Daniel," she said, rising to her feet. "It just happened. And it's a blessing." His expression darkened. "Is it? Or is it your way of locking me in? Making sure you get your piece of everything I've built?" The words hit her like a slap. "Excuse me," she whispered. "You heard me," he snapped. "You've been distant lately, and now suddenly, you're pregnant. You think I'm stupid?" Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "How can you say that to me, after everything we've been through?" But Daniel wasn't listening. His mind was already poisoned by whispers from his business partner, Marcus Langston, a man who believed emotions were liabilities, and by subtle digs from his mother, who never thought Emma was good enough for a Harper. "They warned me," Daniel muttered. "They said you'd try to tie me down, that you were just waiting for your moment." Emma felt the walls closing in. Daniel, this is your child. Our child. Please don't do this. But his face had turned to stone. That night, after hours of screaming and accusations, Daniel did the unthinkable. He demanded she leave. I want you out of this house by morning, he said, voice flat, eyes cold. Take whatever you need, but don't come back. Emma stood in stunned silence, clutching her stomach as if shielding the baby from his hatred. You don't mean that, she whispered. I do, she pleaded. She begged. She cried. But he remained unmoved. By sunrise, Emma packed a single suitcase. The staff avoided eye contact as she walked out of the marble foyer one last time. No driver was offered. No apology. No promise to check on her or the baby. Just silence. She hailed a cab, her world shattered, her heart broken, her future uncertain, as the gates of the mansion closed behind her. Emma wiped away her tears and whispered to the child inside her, "We'll be okay, I promise." She didn't know how. She didn't know where she would go. But she knew one thing for certain. She would never let Daniel Harper break her spirit. Not then. Not ever. The cab dropped her off in front of a nondescript brick building, in the older part of the city, far removed from the gated communities and rooftop lounges she once knew. It was a women's shelter, modest, a little run down, but safe. Emma stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, clutching her suitcase, staring up at the worn sign above the door. She had no idea what would come next. All she knew was that she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now, not with a baby on the way. Inside, the air smelled of bleach and overcooked rice. A kind woman named Rosa, the shelter coordinator, welcomed her with a soft voice and tired eyes. She showed Emma to a small, shared room, 2 beds, a creaky dresser, and a single window that overlooked an alley. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. It was a place to breathe. The days were long, filled with uncertainty and aching silence. Nights were harder. Emma would lie awake, her hand on her growing belly, wondering how everything had gone so wrong, so quickly. There were times she questioned herself. Had she done something to deserve this? Had she missed the signs? Was she really alone now? Money ran out quickly. Daniel had canceled their joint accounts, leaving her with barely a few $100s. She applied for part-time jobs, anything she could do that wouldn't strain her body too much. Eventually, she started working at a nearby diner 3 nights a week, bussing tables and refilling coffee cups. The tips were meager, but every dollar counted. Other women at the shelter told her their stories: abuse, addiction, abandonment. Emma listened quietly, never sharing her own past. She didn't want pity, and she didn't want to be seen as the millionaire's wife who lost everything. In this place, her past didn't matter. Only survival did. Her belly grew. Strangers would smile and ask how far along she was. Emma learned to smile back, to accept their kindness even when her heart felt like it was barely holding together. She wore second-hand maternity clothes and walked to work through the snow. There were days when she had to choose between bus fare and lunch, and yet, through it all, she never stopped talking to the child inside her. "You're already so loved," she would whisper at night. "We're going to make it, I promise." Then came the night when the contractions began early, painful, and unexpected. Rosa rushed her to the hospital. Emma was terrified, but she bore the pain with quiet determination. Hours later, she held her son in her arms for the first time. His eyes were wide and curious, his skin soft and warm. She named him Lucas James Harper. Tears streamed down her face as she cradled him. In that moment, she felt something deeper than pain or loss. She felt purpose. Lucas was her anchor now. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Emma returned to the shelter with Lucas wrapped in a donated blanket, clutching a small diaper bag someone had left in the shelter's donation bin. She continued working part-time, rotating between shifts at the diner and weekend work cleaning office buildings. Rosa often watched Lucas during her shifts, becoming a quiet source of strength in Emma's fragile world. Still, there were moments when despair crept in when she found herself staring out the shelter window late at night, wondering how she'd ever give Lucas the life he deserved. There were nights when her body ached so badly she could barely stand, when the idea of giving up whispered seductively in her mind. But each time, she pushed forward. For Lucas, Emma began keeping a journal, faded pages, bound in a worn leather cover she found at a thrift shop. Every night, she wrote to her son. "Dear Lucas," the entries began. "One day, you'll read this. And when you do, I want you to know how much I loved you, even before I met you." She wrote about their struggles, their small victories, their quiet moments of joy, his first smile, his giggles during bath time, the way he reached for her finger when he slept. She didn't write out of bitterness. She wrote out of love. She wanted Lucas to understand the truth, not just the pain. Each page carried her hopes, her fears, her resilience, and through every hardship, every tear, every long walk in the cold, Emma kept one thought at the front of her mind: he is worth it. Every second, every sacrifice. In the months after Emma's departure, Daniel Harper buried himself in work. He told himself it was better this way: clean break, no distractions. He had a company to run, an empire to build, and no time for emotional weakness. The public didn't need to know about the personal fallout. As far as they were concerned, Daniel was still the golden boy of Silicon Valley. And in a way, he was. HarperTech exploded in growth. Investors lined up, eager to be part of his next big innovation, groundbreaking artificial intelligence platform that promised to revolutionize cybersecurity. The media hailed him as a genius, a visionary. He graced the covers of Forbes, Time, and Wired. Awards, accolades, and billion-dollar valuations became the new norm. At 33, he became one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America. Daniel bought a second home in Aspen, then a third in Paris. His LA mansion became the site of lavish parties filled with celebrities, influencers, and tech elites. Champagne flowed like water. Mottos whispered his name like he was a legend. To the outside world, Daniel Harper had everything, but the truth was more hollow than he let on. The relationships were all surface-level, fleeting, and transactional. He cycled through women like accessories, avoiding anything that hinted at commitment. His closest confidant became his longtime business partner, Marcus Langston, a sharp and ruthless executive who prided himself on keeping feelings far from the boardroom. Emotions are a liability. Marcus once told him, "Cut them off and you'll never lose." Daniel took the advice to heart. He didn't think about Emma. He didn't think about the baby she was supposedly carrying. Instead, he drowned his conscience in excess money, power, distraction. Anything to avoid the silence, but silence has a way of creeping back in. It started as restlessness. Then came the insomnia. Nights stretched long and sleepless. He began waking in cold sweats, haunted by dreams of a woman crying in a doorway, her arms wrapped protectively around her stomach. He shook it off, told himself it meant nothing, until the betrayal. In the third year of HarperTech's meteoric success, Daniel discovered that Marcus had been siphoning company assets and making secret backdoor deals to secure control of a competing startup. The betrayal was deep, calculated, and devastating. The fallout was brutal. The board turned on Daniel. Investors withdrew in fear. Legal battles ensued, draining time and money. By the time the dust settled, Daniel had lost nearly half of his company. His public image took a hit. Rumors swirled about internal dysfunction and broken trust. Daniel tried to rebound: new projects, new ventures, new promises. But something had changed. The energy that once fueled him now felt forced. The ambition that once defined him began to feel empty. He could no longer tell whether he was working toward something or simply running from something else. One night, alone in his penthouse, Daniel scrolled aimlessly through his old photos back, when life was simpler. Before the fame, before the money. He found a picture of him and Emma at the beach, barefoot and laughing, their clothes soaked by the waves. Her smile was genuine, so was his. He stared at it for a long time. He told himself she had manipulated him, that she had used the pregnancy to trap him, that she'll never really loved him, only what he could offer, that she was just another name in the long line of people who wanted something from him, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had made the worst mistake of his life. Still, he shoved the thought aside. Admitting regret would mean admitting fault, and Daniel Harper didn't fail. He rebuilt. He pushed forward, but deep in the quiet corners of his mind, where the spotlight didn't reach, a question began to take root. What if she wasn't the problem? Time moved forward, slow and steady like the changing of seasons. For Emma, each day was a small, sometimes painful step toward something better. Life no longer revolved around mere survival. With Lucas in her arms, she found purpose, and with purpose came determination. After saving for nearly a year, Emma enrolled in night classes at a local community college. She studied business administration, often with Lucas bundled up in the corner of the library, coloring quietly while she wrote essays and studied for exams. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but it gave her hope, a tangible plan for a future where she could stand on her own 2 feet. By day, she worked odd jobs. She took on housekeeping shifts, babysat for other single mothers at the shelter, and eventually found part-time work at a small bakery. It was there that an idea began to form. Emma had always loved baking. Back when life with Daniel was still warm and new, she would fill their kitchen with the scent of cinnamon rolls and honey biscuits. She hadn't touched a whisk in years, but her muscle memory returned the moment she stepped behind the counter. She began experimenting in the bakery's kitchen during off hours, bringing in her own recipes: gluten-free muffins, lemon lavender scones, and her now locally double chocolate banana bread. The bakery owner, Mrs. Green, took notice. "You've got talent, sweetheart," she said one afternoon. "You should think about selling your own line." Emma hesitated, but the seed was planted. Over the next 2 years, she worked tirelessly to turn that idea into something real. She started a small home-based business, Lucas and Loaf, selling fresh-baked goods at local farmers markets and online. The name was inspired by the 2 loves of her life, her son and her bread. The community took notice. Local newspapers ran a story about the single mom baking her way back. Orders increased. So did her confidence. Lucas grew alongside her dream. By age 6, he was a bright, thoughtful boy, kind, curious, and always asking questions. He loved reading and space documentaries, and he had a habit of saving his pocket money to buy ingredients for his mom's baking experiments. He never complained about their small apartment or secondhand clothes. To him, life was full of adventure. One rainy afternoon, as Emma folded laundry, Lucas sat beside her, unusually quiet. "Mama," he asked, "do I have a daddy?" Emma froze, the towel in her hands falling to her lap. She had always known this question would come, but hearing it from Lucas's soft, trusting voice hit her like a wave. She looked into his wide brown eyes, so much like Daniel's, and took a deep breath. "Yes, sweetheart," she said gently. "You do? Where is he?" "He made some choices that took him away from us," she said carefully, choosing her words with love and honesty. "But it wasn't your fault. He didn't know how to be ready for someone as special as you." "Did he know about me?" Emma hesitated. "He knew I was going to have you, but he wasn't ready to be part of our lives." Lucas didn't cry. He simply nodded, then wrapped his arms around her waist. "I'm glad I have you," he said. Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she kissed the top of his head. "And I'm so lucky to have you." Life wasn't easy, but it was beautiful in its own quiet way. Emma's business expanded enough for her to rent a small storefront on the edge of downtown. Locals came for her pastries, but they stayed for her warmth. She employed women from the shelter, gave free baking classes to teens, and donated leftovers to nearby food banks. She never became rich, never chased fame, but she earned something far more valuable: respect, stability, peace. Emma had built a life from the ashes of her heartbreak. She had every reason to be bitter, every excuse to quit, but she chose resilience. She chose grace. She chose love. And as she watched Lucas grow confident, kind, and full of dreams, she knew that no amount of luxury could match the quiet triumph of the life they had built together. At 10 years old, Lucas Harper stood proudly on the stage of the state science fair, holding a trophy nearly half his size. His project, a solar-powered water purification system made from recycled materials, had stunned the judges. But it wasn't just the science that impressed them. It was the handwritten note attached to the display. Built in our small kitchen, with help from my mom, who taught me to never give up, even when life gets hard. Lucas Harper, age 10. Local news stations picked up the story. A few reporters visited Emma's bakery to meet the mother-son duo behind the viral sensation. The article was heartwarming, full of photos of Lucas beaming beside Emma in her flour-dusted apron. The headline read, "Single Moms Support Powers Boys, Big Win at State Science Fair." The article made its way to the internet, bouncing between parenting blogs, community news feeds, and eventually, the inbox of one Daniel Harper. He hadn't been looking for her. In fact, he hadn't even allowed himself to say her name out loud in years. But the moment he saw the name Lucas Harper, something deep in his gut twisted. It couldn't be a coincidence. He clicked the link, and the screen filled with the smiling face of a young boy, wide brown eyes, a curious tilt to his head, and a faint dimple on his right cheek. The resemblance hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. The boy looked exactly like he did at that age. A voice in the back of his mind whispered what he already knew. "He's yours, for the rest of the day." Daniel couldn't focus. He left a board meeting halfway through. His assistant followed him down the hallway, asking if he was sick. He waved her off, locked himself in his office, and stared at the photo for hours. By that evening, he had hired a private investigator. It didn't take long. The report confirmed everything. Mima never remarried, never sued for child support, and raised Lucas entirely on her own. There were copies of news articles, school records, and even a blurry photo of the boy playing with a model rocket in a community park. The report ended with a simple line: "Biological paternity is highly probable. Recommend approach with caution." Daniel sat in silence for a long time after reading the file. Guilt crept into every inch of his body. The success he had built felt small now, worthless. He had a son, and he had abandoned him before he ever took his first breath. For the first time in years, Daniel cried. The next day, dressed in jeans and a baseball cap, Daniel parked a few blocks away from a charming little bakery called Lucas and Loaf. He stood across the street for nearly 10 minutes before finally walking in. A bell chimed overhead. The scent of cinnamon and warm bread enveloped him immediately. There was a small crowd at the counter, a line of customers chatting over coffee and pastries. The space was cozy, welcoming, with colorful chalkboard menus and a wall covered in children's art. Many signed Lucas. And then, he saw her. Emma. She stood behind the counter, laughing gently as she handed a muffin to a little girl. Her hair was tied back, and there was flour on her apron, but her smile was unmistakable. She looked older, yes, but stronger, happier. The weight she once carried had turned into grace. Daniel's throat tightened. He took a step forward, and Emma glanced up. Her smile faltered just slightly as their eyes met. Time seemed to freeze. For a long moment, she just stared. Daniel removed his cap slowly. "Hi, Emma," he said quietly. Her face remained unreadable, calm, controlled, but her eyes, those soft green eyes, flickered with a storm of emotions. Surprise, pain, and something deeper, resolve. "I didn't expect to ever see you again," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I didn't expect to deserve to," he replied. They stood there for several seconds, silence wrapping around them. Behind the counter, a timer buzzed. Emma turned it off, never breaking eye contact. Daniel looked around the bakery. "This place, it's incredible. You did all this on your own?" She nodded. "Yes, I did." There was no spite in her voice, no sarcasm, just truth. "I saw the article," Daniel continued, "about Lucas. I didn't know. Not really. Not until I saw his face." Emma crossed her arms. "You didn't want to know. That was the difference." He looked down, ashamed. "You're right." The silence stretched again, heavier this time. Finally, he looked up. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to meet him. Just once. If you'd let me." Emma studied him for a long moment. She saw the cracks in his armor, the tiredness in his eyes. This wasn't the man who had thrown her out years ago. This was someone older, humbled, maybe even broken. "Let me think about it," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "That's all I ask." And with that, he turned and left, the bell chiming once more behind him. 3 days passed after Daniel's visit to Lucas and Loaf, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling in her chest, a mix of unease, anger, and something heavier she didn't want to name. She hadn't told Lucas yet. She didn't know how to begin. The truth was still raw, tangled in too many years of pain and survival. On the 4th day, she received a message through the bakery's business email. "Emma, I understand if you never want to speak to me again, but I'd like a chance to apologize, to really talk. Not about the past, but about Lucas. I'm staying in town for a few days. Please tell me when and where, or not at all." Daniel, she read it twice, then closed the laptop. It took another 2 days for her to decide. They met at a quiet park near the edge of town, under a wide oak tree, where Lucas often liked to read. It was early morning, and the grass was still dewy. Emma arrived first, wrapped in a light sweater, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Daniel walked up slowly, a coffee in hand. He wore no suit, no designer watch, no facade. Just a man stripped of the armor he once wore too well. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. Emma didn't return the sentiment. "I'm only here because Lucas might deserve something I can't give him. But let's be clear, this is for him, not for you." He nodded, accepting the truth without argument. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then Emma broke the silence. "You want to talk? Fine, let's talk." Her voice trembled, but it didn't falter. "Do you remember what you said to me that night? That I trapped you? That I was using our child to ruin your life?" Daniel's eyes filled with regret. "Yes, I remember all of it." Emma's breath caught, but she pressed on. "You humiliated me, threw me out of my home when I was terrified and alone. Do you know how I survived, Daniel? Do you know what it's like to give birth in a hospital room with no one there to hold your hand? To feed a child on diner tips and discounted formula?" "I do now," Daniel whispered. "And I hate myself for it." Emma's voice cracked. "You don't get to hate yourself and expect that to fix anything." "I don't," he said quickly. "I'm not here to fix the past. I know I can't. I want to know him. To be a father to Lucas. If you'll let me." Emma stared at him. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, sometimes with screaming, sometimes with tears. But in reality, it was quieter, sadder, because the person standing in front of her wasn't a monster. He was a man broken by his own choices. "You think you can just walk in and be his father?" she asked. "After 10 years. "No," he said, "but maybe I can start trying." She exhaled sharply, looking away toward the swing set in the distance. "Lucas is happy. He's kind and smart and full of hope, and I did that. Without you. I believe you, Daniel said. I see that now. I don't want your money, Emma added. Don't insult me by offering it. Lucas doesn't need a new house or a private school. He needs people who don't walk away. I'm not offering pity, Daniel replied, and I know I'm not entitled to anything, but I would like the chance to show him who I am now, not who I was. Emma looked at him again, her eyes searching. She saw sincerity, guilt, but also patience. He wasn't pushing. He wasn't demanding. He was waiting. She sighed. He knows he has a father. I didn't lie to him. But he doesn't know your name. Not yet. If I let you meet him, it's on my terms. Of course, Daniel said. Anything you say. You don't get to come and go. You don't get to rewrite the past or play the hero. You show up. You stay, even when it's awkward. Even when he asks questions you don't want to answer. I will, he promised. And you will not hurt him. Because if you do, I will never forgive you. Not again. Daniel swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. I understand. Emma took a deep breath. You can meet him. Briefly, at the bakery. Tomorrow afternoon. A wave of emotion crossed Daniel's face. Hope, gratitude, fear. Thank you, he said quietly. Emma turned to leave, her heart heavy, but resolute as she walked away. Daniel remained standing under the tree, alone with the consequences of everything he'd once thrown away. The first meeting was quiet, almost awkward. Lucas sat at a corner table inside the bakery, nibbling on a chocolate chip cookie, while Emma stood behind the counter, watching with quiet caution. Daniel approached slowly, nervous in a way he hadn't felt in years. He expected hostility, maybe curiosity, but instead, Lucas looked up and gave a small, polite smile. Hi, Daniel said. I'm a friend of your mom's. I heard about your science project. It was incredible. Lucas perked up. Really? You read about it? I did. You used solar panels and recycled bottles for filtration. That's pretty advanced stuff. The boy beamed. Most people didn't understand how it worked. I did, Daniel replied softly. And I'd love to hear more if that's okay with you. Lucas nodded eagerly. And so began something new. Emma kept her distance at first, always present during visits, always watching. But she couldn't deny what she saw. Lucas liked him. Not in the starry-eyed way a boy might idolize a long-lost parent, but with cautious fascination. Daniel was patient. He listened. He asked questions. And he never once tried to buy Lucas's affection. They started small. Lunch at the bakery. A trip to the local science museum. Building a model rocket together in the park. When Lucas learned Daniel played piano, something he hadn't done in years, he asked him to teach him a song. They spent an afternoon huddled around an old keyboard Emma had picked up at a yard sale, laughing through wrong notes and clumsy rhythms. Each visit peeled back another layer. Daniel never pushed. He answered Lucas's questions honestly, even when they stung. Why weren't you around when I was little? Lucas had asked one afternoon. Daniel paused. Because I made a terrible mistake. I thought I was doing what was best for me, but I didn't think about what was best for you or your mom, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Lucas didn't say much in return, but he stayed close that day. Outside of those visits, Daniel changed. He withdrew from high society events, sold one of his luxury homes, and poured resources into starting a local foundation for underprivileged youth in STEM programs. He began attending charity events in the very community where Emma had rebuilt her life. People noticed, but more importantly, so did Emma. She saw the shift in him, not a man trying to erase his past, but one trying to earn his place in the present. Lucas's innocence, his honesty, and Emma's quiet grace had done what years of success never could. Daniel was finally learning how to be human. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. the kind where sunlight filters lazily through the curtains, and the scent of cinnamon rolls still lingers in the air. Lucas had been searching for an old photo album for a school project when he stumbled upon a weathered leather-bound journal, tucked in a box at the back of his mother's closet. The cover was soft, the edges worn with time. Curious, he sat cross-legged on the floor and flipped it open. "Dear Lucas, I don't know when you'll read this, but I hope you'll understand why I wrote it." The words gripped him instantly. He kept reading page after page, letter after letter written over the years of his childhood. Each entry was a window into a world he'd never fully understood. He read about the night Emma was cast out, pregnant and alone, about the days she worked double shifts and still managed to sing him to sleep, about how scared she had been but never let it stop her. He read about Daniel too, not just what he had done, but how Emma had struggled to explain it to a boy too young to understand abandonment. She had written with grace, never bitterness. But the heartbreak was clear. Tears welled in Lucas's eyes. That evening, he asked his mom if they could invite Daniel over. Daniel arrived with a smile and a wrapped gift, a telescope he had promised to bring. But the moment he saw Lucas's face, he knew something was different. Lucas didn't speak at first. He simply held up the journal. "I found this," he said, voice calm but serious. "I read it." Daniel swallowed hard. "I see. I didn't know everything," Lucas said. "I knew you weren't there, but I didn't know what she went through, what she gave up for me." Daniel sat down slowly, the weight of the truth settling over him like a storm. "I failed you," he said, his voice cracking. "I failed her. I failed both of you in ways I can never take back. I thought I was right, that I was protecting my freedom, but I was just a coward." Lucas's lower lip quivered, but he didn't cry. "I'm not mad, I just needed to know the truth." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I promise I will never walk away again. I will be here for every science fair, every piano recital, every birthday, if you'll let me." At that moment, Emma walked in, her gaze bouncing between them. She paused when she saw the journal in Lucas's hands. Lucas looked at her, then at Daniel. "We're not perfect, but we can still be a family, right?" Emma felt her heart crack open. She crossed the room and pulled Lucas into her arms. Daniel, overcome, joined them, his tears falling freely. For the first time in years, all three of them stood together, no longer broken, just healing. Together. Years passed like chapters turning in a well-worn book, each one filled with growth, healing, and the quiet rebuilding of a life once shattered. Emma's little bakery, Lucas and Loaf, had blossomed into something far greater than she had ever imagined. What began as a small home business had grown into 2 bustling storefronts, and a catering arm that served local schools and community centers. She employed a team of women, many of whom were once in her shoes, and mentored young entrepreneurs who walked through her doors with dreams in their pockets and doubts in their hearts. Emma still woke early to knead dough. Flour still dusted her clothes more often than not, and her laugh echoed through the kitchen like music. But there was something new in her eyes, no peace. The kind that came not from ease, but from triumph over struggle. Across town, Daniel had redefined his legacy. He'd stepped away from Harpertech, leaving the day-to-day operations to a new CEO in its place. He poured his energy and his wealth into something deeply personal, the Second Start Foundation, a nonprofit supporting single mothers and abandoned families. The mission was clear: to give others what he had once failed to give Emma. He remained humble, often attending workshops and fundraisers, not as a guest of honor, but as a quiet presence, listening, learning, offering without demanding praise. And in the center of it all was Lucas. Now 17, he had blossomed into a young man as kind as he was brilliant. He had earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university, planning to major in environmental engineering. The boy who once built water purifiers from plastic bottles was now preparing to take on the world. On the night before his departure for college, the three of them gathered for dinner in Emma's backyard. The table was set under strings of soft, golden lights, dishes piled high with home-cooked food, and the scent of roasted vegetables and garlic bread filled the air. Laughter rang out easily. Lucas told stories from his internship. Daniel teased him about still forgetting to clean his room. Emma brought out an old photo album, and they flipped through pages of memories, some painful, others sweet, all now a part of their shared story. As the night deepened, a quiet moment settled over the table. Lucas looked between his parents and smiled. You know, I used to wonder if we'd ever be like this, together. I didn't think it was possible. Emma reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Love takes time, so does healing. Daniel nodded, his voice thick with emotion. And sometimes, the hardest part is learning to forgive ourselves. Lucas looked at them both. You taught me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means choosing to move forward. Emma's eyes shimmered with pride. That's right, sweetheart. The final scene of their story, though quiet, was profound. Not a grand reunion or a perfect ending, but a table surrounded by family, once broken, now whole. There were no illusions about the past. No one pretended it hadn't hurt, but around that table sat three people who had chosen growth over bitterness, hope over resentment. Love had not erased the past, but it had rewritten the future, together.